Hey you guys, good morning. It's Coach Jessica. Well, this thing says I'm live. I always question that because sometimes the beginning gets cut off, but hopefully I am live this morning. Hope you all had a good weekend. Hope it was a good Mother's Day. I know holidays can bring a mixed kind of reaction. They're very joyous for some. There's a lot of pain attached to holidays for others. And either way, they can actually bring danger zones, which is actually what I'm going to talk to you about today, triggers and danger zones. And the timing of the holiday weekend with it being Mother's Day, I think is a good time to sort of go into that conversation. So last week I posted an old video of me talking about Ed and explaining who Ed was, the voice of sabotage. I briefly mentioned in that video HALT. Basically, I said there are conditions where you are more likely to be influenced by Ed, and that's really what I want the focus to be on this week, is figuring out what conditions in your life are you more likely to be influenced by Ed. You may wonder why sometimes you're able to make it through. Let's say you have a compulsive thought that you should go eat a certain thing, but you think it through, you work through it, and you don't go do it. Another time, you have that same thought about the same, going and doing the same thing, that same behavior, same food, and you just feel like you are utterly powerless to stop yourself. And the reason is because we are more susceptible at certain times and in certain circumstances. And so like I said, I briefly sort of introduced the idea of HALT. HALT is an acronym. It stands for hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. HALT is also a word that means stop, halt, stop, right? HALT. And so it's really important to start to wrap your brain around this process because it is an important thing in recovery. In fact, I was first introduced to this concept of HALT when I was 18 years old, and I think I had just turned 18. I was in an eating disorder hospital down in Florida, and I became aware that there were these 4 danger zones. Now, since then, my knowledge of that has expanded greatly. But what they are is they are the top 4 conditions where someone is likely to relapse into their illness, or where they're most likely to give in to their compulsion. Becoming too hungry, too angry, too lonely, and too tired sets you up. And so, again, the reason that the acronym itself is important is because the secret to getting through being too hungry, too angry, too lonely, too tired is actually taking a minute and stopping, halting. I have to stop. If I don't halt when I realize I'm in one of those top danger zones, I'm probably going to give in to the voice of sabotage. Halting, stopping, taking a time out, doing something to break up the thought process, and there's some temporary strategies that can help you through that. That actually buys you time to think it through. So, and I'll help you with how you think it through, but before I do that, before I get to that part of the process, I want you to start to think about what your primary and even deep triggers are. This requires some work on your part. Like I said, pretty much for all of us, anyone who has any kind of compulsion or addiction, not just food, when we are in the conditions of being too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, especially if we are a combination of those things. I know there are situations where I've been hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. We are very, very susceptible to those enemy thoughts. And so what I'm going to ask you to do today is really think about all the triggers in your life. for me, this is something that built over time. Like I said, I knew my primary triggers were hungry, angry, lonely, tired, but there were also so many other times I just felt out of control. And sometimes you don't realize that you're in a triggering situation until after the behavior has happened. So let's talk about Mother's Day. Sometimes a top trigger for someone might be celebration. You get into your head that because it is a special day on the calendar, then it makes you susceptible to thoughts of going back and eating off plan or overeating or eating when you're not hungry or wherever you are. But celebration can actually be a pretty big trigger. Notice that's not in the HALT, but it is a big trigger for some people. Another trigger might just be being around family members, depending on what the dynamic is there. You may have family members that you always overeat with, or you always binge eat with, or you may have a family member that always feels like they put pressure on you about eating certain foods because they don't understand your sickness, or they don't understand that you need to eat differently. So it is complex. But this is critical. So in your journal, in your notebook, wherever you are taking notes for this class or wherever you are working through, I am going to ask you to make some columns. And you need about 4 columns. You might even want 4 separate pages. But you're going to start to document the times where you are more susceptible to ED. And I would give the columns headings, like one would be people. One of the things you might realize is that when you're around certain people, you tend to give into your compulsion. How do you know a person is a trigger? Well, every time you go around them, you can't stick to what you wanted to do about food. And it might be because they're a food pusher, like they literally are like, here, eat this. Or it might be because of how you feel when you're around them. And so you need to know, because if you know what your danger zones are or your triggers are, you can be on guard for ED thoughts. So that's where this is going. So again, you need a list of people who are danger zones for you to be around. Now, it doesn't mean you don't love these people. It doesn't mean you don't like to spend time with them, but it's raising your awareness that when I am in this person's presence, I struggle with food either then or after they leave. Sometimes we don't eat in their presence, but because of the emotional dynamic, when they leave us, we then eat to recover from having been in their presence. So you need to really acknowledge in your life who affects your eating, which people affect your eating. The next column or the next page, I would suggest you write places. If you have always gone to a certain restaurant and there's a certain food there that you just feel like you can't even imagine going to that place and not eating that food, that place is a trigger for you. A basic, easy example would be the movie theater. If you've never gone to the movie theater and not bought boxes of candy and popcorn and drink, that place is a trigger for you. I'm going to tell you right now, the end game here is not to avoid your triggers. That's not where I'm going with this. This is about you being aware so you can plan for them. So we can't get to next. We can't get to what you do with triggers or what to do about them until you know what they are. Just know that there are certain people, there are certain places where you're going to have these very, very, very strong triggers. The next page or the next column should be emotions. For example, in HALT, you hear anger, right? You hear loneliness, right? But there's a lot of other emotions that can leave you susceptible too. It can be, I know for me, one of my triggers was feeling inadequate, feeling like I was inferior. Fear was a huge trigger for me. Anxiety was a huge trigger for me. Again, it's important to document your emotional triggers so that you know when I start to feel I'm having this emotion, I can expect to hear from Ed, and therefore I'm more susceptible to relapse. So this, again, this exercise is raising your awareness. And then finally, it's the last thing that I would put would be, I would say occasions or events. So it might be like birthdays, vacations. The best way to figure out occasions and events is to look back at your own history. When have you been on a diet, or when have you been eating well, and then you took part in this, maybe it's a wedding, you took part in a special event, or you traveled and you relapsed and you thought it was going to be a one-day thing, and of course it was not. I know, for example, vacation's a huge one. We get into what we think is vacation mentality. I know I have been on a diet before and lost weight to go on a vacation hoping to look good. And then I thought, well, you know what, I'm just going to take the one day off while I'm on this vacation. The rest of the time I'm doing good. And of course, I always decided the first day should be the day that I take off, and I'll do good the rest of the week. And I can remember eating so much or relapsing so hard and eating off plan all week, I couldn't even wear the clothes that I brought to wear on vacation. By the end of the week, I was wearing like stretchy pants instead of these great things that I had dieted down to fit into. So vacation used to be a huge trigger for me. Notice I say used to be, because these are things you can work through. But what you want to do right now is you want to identify, the people, the places, the feelings, the events that make you more susceptible to Ed, because there are absolutely times that it is more difficult for you to press through. When you are aware of and when you become comfortable with and very familiar with your triggers, it puts you in that mode to halt, stop. I need to stop it, because if I make a food decision in the midst of a trigger or in the midst of a danger zone, I'm likely going to make the wrong decision. I'll do a separate video, or I'll talk later this week, or maybe even just do a post talking about what are some temporary things you can do while you're halting. But for now, I think it's a pretty big assignment. You can't just rush through it. I would ask, I know a lot of times when I have people do this, they just want to post in the group, hey, here's my triggers, and they list 3 or 4 things. That's not doing the deep work that you need to get well. I do want you to share your triggers. If you know right off the bat, remember, everybody, for all of us, being too hungry, angry, lonely, tired are triggers, right? But what else? What else is it in your life? And so while it's fine and it's good for you to post in the group about what your triggers are, you can even post right under this video if you want to. This is some work you need to do in your notebook. It needs to be written down, because you need to start to become very, very familiar with your triggers. And a lot of times you say, well, I don't know what my trigger was. But if you actually take a moment of relapse, or take a moment of, for example, maybe you eat really well all day, and then all of a sudden at nighttime you find yourself binging. Guess what the trigger is? It's nighttime, right? So I would say that might fall under the event, or a certain time or thing that might fall under that. So there might be a certain time of day that's a trigger for you. I know for some people, and this is different than loneliness, when they are alone, that is a trigger for them. So maybe you're around your family all the time. When they all go somewhere and you find yourself by yourself, being alone is the event that triggers your eating, that sneakiness that comes. And so being aware that that's a trigger, you can plan ahead and know how to overcome what Ed is throwing at you during that time. So focus on that. I know everybody always wants to jump ahead and say, but what do I do when I'm alone? What do I do when I'm tired, when I'm sad, when I'm angry, when I'm afraid? And what I'm saying is, you got to know the triggers first, and then we'll work through what you do. So anyway, this is a really, really important thing. I know there are people that have done classes with me or worked with me in the past, and they're like, Jessica, I didn't really write down my triggers. I really wish I had. It is a huge, huge thing. Those who did, I mean, even now, I'm working with someone one-on-one. She's not in this group, but She did a group with me back in 2018, and she still has her notes, and they are so helpful. She still has her triggers written out, and it's so helpful for working through things. So I really, really encourage you to do that. But so this week is all about danger zones and triggers. I'm also going to be talking about some temporary strategies. I'm going to do a separate video on keto and eating disorders and alcohol, because I didn't get to that on Saturday. So that's what we've got coming up. But please do the work on your end. I also want to reiterate, watch Saturday's video. Even if you were present for it, even if you were there on the Zoom, go back and watch and listen again. It hits you differently when you listen to it over again. You get more out of it. So please, please do that. Make use of this group while you're here. You can get better. I hope this is an amazing week for y'all. Looking forward to just continued growth. Remember, one of the most important things that you can do is check in every day and state your intentions. If you're not doing that, you're not giving enough to this group. And remember, it's for you. Getting clean, making changes, becoming food sober, they require action on your part. Just hanging out here isn't enough. You might get inspired, you might feel hopeful. It's not enough to actually create change in your life. You have to do something. And one of the first and best things you can do is come here in the group and post your intentions every single day, and then check out at the end of the day. So that is it. Hope y'all have a great day. If you have any questions on triggers or danger zones, feel free to ask those questions. Thanks, and have a great day.